Dude, hospitals are the worst. Dude, y'all, if anybody wants to hear a crazy epic story, I had sepsis once and I was in the hospital for 15 days. I was bedridden for almost 60 days. Crazy story. I'd be happy to tell it to you guys if you're interested. All right, so sepsis, I'm just gonna kind of walk around while I tell the story. Sepsis is basically the infection of your blood and organs. Bacterial infection. It was a very common way for people to die before antibiotics, and usually would get it from like a wound in like your body or something like that. But basically, several years ago, actually at this point it's been about 7 or 8 years. So around December, I think it was 2014, I started to get really sick, like kind of like a flu. I got like a high fever and I was just feeling really, tired and fatigued. And I didn't know why, so I kind of rested and I started to feel a little better. So I ended up going to work, but I had to go home because I was still really tired and feeling feverish. This kind of goes on for a little bit, and then I go to the doctor and they say, oh, you just have the flu. This went on for several days. I'm like, oh, you just had the flu, just wait it out. And so I went to the urgent care and they were like, oh, you just had the flu, you just need to rest more. So I did that, and about another week passed, still feeling sick, and I started to get like a sore throat and all that, and like cough and all that stuff, fever, tired, all that stuff, having trouble with going to work. So what then happens is I go to the urgent care again, and they're like, well, okay, if you're still not good, then maybe you have something else, maybe like mono. So they took like a blood sample, and it turns out that the blood sample did come back positive that I had mono, but we're gonna put a bookmark in that because that'll come up later. Yeah, body was fighting real hard. So after that, I went back home and like just kind of waited out. So another week passes. At this point, I think it was like before Christmas. Like my birthday is in December too. So my birthday went by, I was sick. It's like before Christmas, like a few days or something, maybe several days. Still sick, my sore throat's getting worse, getting hard to like swallow. So I go to the doctor and they're like, well, we can't do anything, but we're gonna give you steroids for your throat. So they gave me steroids, and my sore throat cleared up pretty quickly, but my sickness got insane, like way worse. I was having crazy fevers. My gut was like swollen. I was having pain, many other things that I don't think are necessary to describe on stream. Use your imagination if you wish, but it was really bad. And I didn't know, like at the time I was like, I was living with my ex-partner at the time. She was like, you need to go to the hospital. And I was like, I don't know. Like I was one of those, those men who are like, I don't need to go to the emergency room, blah, blah. Eventually, after a while at 2 a.m., I ended up driving myself to the hospital, to emergency room, because I didn't want to call an ambulance. And why it's always like 2 a.m., right? Always. I went in there and I was like, I'm really sick. I think I need like be admitted. And they were like, okay. And then they took my blood pressure and heart rate, and like my blood pressure was really low and my heart rate was like super high. I had a huge fever, and they were like immediately like, you are extremely sick, like we need to get you immediately in here. And so they got me hooked up to like all these IVs in the emergency room, and they took a scan of my gut was like, my gallbladder was all swollen and infected, and I was in ICU for like a day and a half while they were trying to like stabilize me, and I was like out of it at this point. I was just like eventually they had to put like a draining sort of like sac thing for my gallbladder because it was so infected. It had to like be drained out every day, and I was on antibiotics, like an IV antibiotic for like, I was in the hospital at that time for about 10 days, where I was extremely weak. I lost about 50 pounds. I'm not even kidding. I weigh 228 pounds right now. During that time, I weighed about 155 pounds. I was rail thin. Anyway, I was super tired. I could barely walk. I could barely do anything. Eventually, they were trying to get my white blood cell count to go up. Eventually, it started to get regular, but it turned out I was allergic to the first antibiotic that they gave me, which gave me a full body rash. So then they had to switch antibiotics. That was fun. So I went home after 10 days because my white blood cell count was fine, but then I was still getting insane fevers and all that stuff. I didn't feel good, so I went back to the hospital. Turned out I was allergic to the other antibiotic that they gave me. So they gave me a new one, and I stayed in the hospital for 5 more days until my fevers started to stop. Eventually they did, so a total of 15 days in the hospital. And then basically after that, I'm not even kidding, like 60 days of, you know, the first few weeks being basically bedridden, and then slowly, you know, getting stronger and stronger, being able to walk more. Yeah, I made it through full recovery, and even they thought they were gonna have to take out my gallbladder. So here's a funny story, and this is, if you guys want like a moral, or like not a moral, but like a lesson to learn from this, here it is. So I had that gallbladder drain thing, and they thought they were trying to see if it could repair and like start working. And eventually they tried to like plug the drainage thing that I have to see if it worked. It started to really hurt, and so they were like, "Oh, I think that, you know, maybe it's, you know, busted. We have to take it out." They didn't really use those words, but yeah. So I was preparing for that, but I kid you not. I hope nobody here is super squeamish, because the story, it's kind of interesting. Okay, basically, one day I was walking around the house, and the little hose that connects to my gallbladder from the outside to the sac got caught in a doorknob, and it got pulled out about halfway out, and so it really hurt, and I was like, oh, and like felt like the inside of my gut was just being pulled and yanked. And I was so, from that experience, I was just like so upset. I was like, this is awful. This is the worst thing ever. I was supposed to get this surgery, and now this is gonna ruin everything, and blah, 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 blah. And so I had to go back to the ER to get that fixed. But what they ended up doing is they just took it out, because it was scarred over, so it should be okay. And they took it out, and they're like, well, it should be working. So if you have any pain, just come back and we'll put a new one in. So they took out, not the gallbladder, they took out the drainage tube. And I kid you not, the next day, the day after, I don't have pain. I'm like, wait, I think my gallbladder is actually working. And turns out it did, and I didn't need to get the surgery. I did not need to get my gallbladder removed. I made a full recovery. So my lesson that I take from that is sometimes good leads to bad, and sometimes bad leads to good. You can never ever know what is gonna happen, because at the time, I thought that little drainage tube being pulled out halfway was like the worst thing ever. I was so upset, but it actually saved my gallbladder from being removed from my body. So, you know, So, thank you for listening to my story. I have many more, but that is the most harrowing